Masechet Menaḥot Daf Mem He. The Mishnah teaches Haparim v'Halim v'Kebasim v'Seirim Enan me'akebin ze et ze. On the various holidays of the year, there were special offerings that were given. Some of them are part of Korban Musaf, or other offerings that are special for various holidays. And the Mishnah is teaching here that the bulls and the rams and the sheep and the goats are not required for each other. We'll see exactly what this means and which ones it's talking about, but more or less, if you don't have all the parim that you need for a certain holiday, you could bring just some of them. Or if you have parim but you don't have elim, and vice versa. So you can bring whatever you have. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Im hayu lahem parim merubim, velo hayu lahem nesachim, yavi par ehad unsachim, velo yakribu kulam belo nesachim. Rabbi Shimon goes a step further, really. He's in agreement with Tanakh Kama that, let's say, you don't have all the parim that you need for a certain thing. You could bring less of them. For example, on Sukkot, each day of Sukkot, we bring parim. We start off with 13 on the first day, and then 12, 11, and so on. So let's say the second day, we're supposed to bring 12 parim. Okay, so the Tanakh Kama says, let's say you don't have 12. You have 11, you have 5. That's okay. You could bring however many parim you have. Rabbi Shimon adds to that. If they have many parim, but they don't have enough money to buy the parim and also the wine libation that goes along with the par, then what should they prioritize? Yavi par echad unsachim velo yakribu kalam belo nesachim. Better to bring just one par with the appropriate wine libation rather than bring all of the parim with no wine libation. So bring as many complete sets as you can. Even one complete set is better than more parim. Gemara says, Hane parim uchvasim dehecha. Which parim and kebasim is it talking about? Which holiday? Ilema dehag kam mishpat kemishpatam ketibehu. Is it talking about Sukkot, which I just mentioned, has the various holidays, various parim on each of the days? This is in Bemidbar, in Parashat Pinchas, which lays out all of the Korban Musaf offerings for every one of the holidays. And there it says, in the context here, this, for example, the second day you have to bring 12 bulls. And then it says, Kam Mishpat. And anytime it says Kam Mishpat, that means you have to do it precisely so. It says it multiple times in various paragraphs for various days there. So therefore, when it comes to Sukkot Parim, you have to bring all of them that are required. So this Mishnah does not apply to Sukkot. Rather, let's apply it to the Musaf sacrifices for Rosh Chodesh and Aseret. These 2 days have the same Korban Musaf number of offerings. That's in Bemidbar, also in Parashat Pinchas. And for both of these days, it's 2-1-7-1. 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, 1 goat. Okay, the important thing for us is the 2 bulls, 1 ram. And so 2 bulls means, if you can, bring 2 bulls. But that's what the Mishnah is saying. Haparim, if you don't have 2 bulls, you only have 1 bull on Rosh Chodesh or on Shavuot, that's okay, just bring 1. Now we ask about the elim. Elim dehecha, I dehanhu, de'ayilhu. Okay, fine, that works for parim. If you don't have 2, bring 1. But it says elim in plural, which means that if you don't have all of the elim, bring only some of them. But that can't work for Rosh Chodesh and Shavuot because, remember, 2-1-7-1, the 1 is for the elim. And you only bring 1 ram. And therefore, what would that mean? Elim. If you don't have all of them, there is only 1. Now, here's where it gets a little bit complicated, which is that in Sefer Vayikra, in chapter 23, it also mentions a list of korbanot that one is required to bring for Shavuot. And over here, this list is similar, but not the same. And so this is in addition. On Shavuot, you have to bring the Korban Musaf offerings. That's 2-1-7-1, as mentioned in Bemidbar. That's 2 bulls, 1 ram. Then in Vayikra, the context here is talking about the Shnei HaLechem that one brings. And with the Shnei HaLechem, you also bring 2 Shelamim. We've discussed somewhat those 2 Korban Shelamims. In addition to the 2 loaves and the 2 Korban Shelamim, lambs for Shelamim, you bring 1-2-7-1. 1 bull, 2 loaves, 7 lambs, and 1 goat. It sounds very similar to the Musaf offerings, except instead of 2-1-7-1, this is 1-2-7-1. Okay, and so maybe when the Mishnah says that you have to bring the Elim, okay, Elim is plural, it is talking about Shavuot. It's not talking about the Musaf offerings for Shavuot, but rather it's talking about the other ones that are mentioned in Vayikra. But the problem with that is, in Pasuk 18, it says, Ufar ben bakar echad ve'elim shenaim yihiyu. It says the word yihiyu. And whenever it says the word havaya, that means precisely so. You have to bring both of these elim. And you can't, if you have only one, it's no good. And therefore, when it says elim in the Mishnah, it can't be referring to Shavuot, not in Bamidbar, where there's only one ram, and not in Vayikra, where there are two rams, but you have to bring both of them. And so we answer, Le'olam da'aseret Torat Kohanim. No, it is in fact referring to the holiday of Shavuot, and what it says in Vayikra, V'hachika amar, lo elim de Torat Kohanim ma'akebi le'ayed de chumash ha'pekudim, ve'lo ayed de chumash ha'pekudim ma'akeb lehu le'elim de Torat Kohanim. It's referring to each is referring to the other book. When the Mishnah says that the elim are not required for each other, it's saying that the elim that are mentioned in Torat Kohanim, that's in Vayikra, where it says two elim. If you don't have those two, well, how about, should I still bring the one mentioned in Chumash Pikudim? That's how the Gemara refers to Bemidbar, means numbers. That our English words, our English names of the Chumashim actually are very ancient. They come from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the sages, and are the same as the names of the books in the Talmud. They don't call it Vayikra and Bemidbar and so on. They call it Chumash Pikudim, which means the book of numbers, of counting. And Torat Kohanim, which means the laws of the Kohanim, or Leviticus. It's slightly different, but almost the same. Okay, anyway, the point is that the Mishnah is saying the Elim that are mentioned in Vayikra, that's two of them. If you don't have them, you could still bring the one in Bamidbar. And if you don't have the one that's missing the one, and you can't bring the one that's mentioned in Bamidbar, that will not prevent you from bringing the two in Vayikra. And so, however, if you want to bring the two rams for Vayikra, and you have only one, you can't just bring one of those. That you need two, because of the pasuk that we said, Havaya. And so that's what the Mishnah is talking about when it says Elim in the plural. It's talking about the various Elim that are brought on Shavuot, including Bemidbar to Vayikra and Vayikra to Bemidbar. Now we ask about that. Ela parim dafilo hadadeh la me'akebi, ve'elim dahacha udahacha hu de la me'akebi inu me'akebi. But then there's an inconsistency in the Mishnah. Because when it comes to parim, the bulls, they are not required for each other, even within the two bulls that you bring in Bemidbar for Shavuot. If you don't have two, you have only one, that's okay. So for parim, even within one section, it's okay. You don't need both. But when it comes to Elim, there it's telling you that, okay, Elim of Bemidbar do not stop you from bringing the one in Vayikra, and the one in Vayikra do not stop you from bringing the one in Bemidbar. But the two Elim that are required in Vayikra are required for each other. So you see that there's an inconsistency in the Mishnah. Whereas this word parim means even the two parim that are in Bemidbar are not required for each other. But when it comes to Elim, that means they're not, that Bemidbar is not required for Vayikra and vice versa, but the two for Vayikra are required for each other. So is it okay to read the Mishnah like that and put parim and Elim next to each other, even though they have different applications? And we answer, Atana, mile katane. Yes, in fact, the Mishnah is teaching each word individually. Parim has one kind of application, Elim another kind of application. For the parim, that's more expansive, more lenient. If you don't have the two bulls, that's okay. You could bring one, and this one will not prevent you from bringing that one, and vice versa. But with Elim, the two for Vayikra, those are required for each other. It says it in the pasuk Havaya, and that the word Elim in the Mishnah has to be understood a little bit differently from the word parim, but that's okay. The author of the Mishnah can list various things, and then you have to go and figure out the interpretation and precise application. The Gemara next is going to cite a pasuk from Hezekiah. Hezekiah, as we know, has a long description of the future Bet HaMikdash, and there are some discrepancies between the laws and the details that he sets out versus what we have in the Torah. So we're going to deal with some of those discrepancies. In Yechezkel it says, Ubiyom HaChodesh, his tikach here, but the pasuk itself does not have tikach. Here's a pasuk. Ubiyom HaChodesh, meaning on Rosh Chodesh, you should bring a par ben bakar timimim v'sheshet kebasim v'ayel timimim yihiyu. Now this is very curious because in Sefer Bemidbar it says 2 parim and 1 ram, and then it says 7 kevasim. So this has only 1 par and 6 kevasim, but really it should be 2 and 7. Ayel, 1 ayel, fine, that's the same. And the next pasuk that we are going to quote this part also, it says, Efal lapar efal la'ayid yaseh mincha v'la kebasim kasher tasig yado. Says regarding the kebasim, as many as you can afford, however many you can get. And then it mentions the shemen that you bring with it also, and the mincha offering. Okay, so let's see what this pasuk means. A pad, ma Talmud omar. Why does it say 1 pad for Rosh Chodesh, when in Bemidbar it says 2 parim? Lefi shenemar bat Torah parim, minayin shim lo masa shenai mebi ehad, Talmud omar pad. Because the Torah says parim, and you have to bring 2 bulls on Rosh Chodesh. So how do you know that if you cannot bring 2, it's okay to bring 1? That's what Yechezkel is coming to teach. Pad is a b'di'avad. You can bring just 1. And the same is true when it says Shisha kebasim. Matamud omar. Why does Yechezkel say 6 kebasim when it should be 7? Lefi shekatab b'Torah shib'ah. Minayin shim lo masa shib'ah yabi shisha. Torah says 7. But how do you know that if you can't bring 7, you don't have 7 available, that you can bring 6? Talmud omar shisha. That's why Pasuk says 6. So minayin she'im לא. מסע 6 יביא 5, 5 יביא 4, 4 יביא 3, 3 יביא 2, ואפילו 1, תלמוד אומר ולכבשים מה שתשיג ידו. And what if you can't afford 5, but you have 6, but you have 5? You don't have 5, but you have 4. You don't have 4, but you have 3. You don't have 3, but you have 2. Or even just 1. If you have just 1, you could still bring it. That's why it says in that next pasuk, kebasim, as many as he can get his hands on. So even 1. Okay, since you're gonna go all the way down to even 1, why does it say 6? So just skip that part altogether and just say as many as you can. Because to the degree possible to find them, you have to go out of your way to make sure to see if you can find as many as you can. So that's why if it only said however many are around, okay, then you would say, I have 1, but that's enough. So that's why it says 6, and they're teaching that if you can, even if you don't have a full amount, the more you can, the better, and best if you have the full 7. And how do you know that these are required for each other? In other words, the bulls and the lambs, you have to bring some bulls and some lambs. How do you know that they are required for each other? Because of the last word that says, kebasim v'ayil timimim yihiyu. So the kebasim, the ayil, and perhaps the pod also here that says in the beginning, it says pod, and then kebasim, ayil, yihiyu. So you have to have at least 1 of each in order to bring any of them. We next quote another pasuk in Yechezkel that requires explanation. Ko amar Adonai Elohim barishon be'echad lachodesh tikach par ben bakar tamim v'chiteta et hamikdash. Hashem says that on the first day of the first month, as will be Rosh Chodesh Nisan, one should take a pod and use that to cleanse the mikdash, and uses the word chiteta like it's a sin. Chiteta, we ask, Olahi, what do you mean chiteta? If you're going to cleanse something from sin, then you should bring a korban hatat for that. But this pod is an korban olah. So it doesn't make sense to say bring a korban olah and use it to atone for sin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, parasha zo Eliyahu atid ledor shaham. Rabbi Yochanan says, either we don't have any explanation. When Eliyahu Navi comes in the future, then he'll explain it to us. But right now, you're right. It's a good question. Rav Asher Amar miluim hikribu bimei Ezra keder shekribu bimei Moshe. Rav Asher says that I can explain it. We don't have to wait for Eliyahu. This is referring to an inauguration sacrifice like was done in the time of Moshe. In the time of Moshe, on the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the 8 days before that, there were lots of special korbanot, not usual korbanot, not the usual one for Rosh Chodesh, but rather a special one for the Yemei HaMiluim. And just like in the time of Moshe, when he inaugurated the Mishkan, so he had the special korbanot, so too, when the second Bet HaMikdash was inaugurated, in the time of Ezra, also they brought a special pot that was that acted to cleanse the Mikdash. This is quite interesting because when Hezekiah is describing his future Bet HaMikdash, it's not clear. Is he describing the second Bet HaMikdash or a third Bet HaMikdash? Peshat is describing the second Bet HaMikdash, as Hezekiah is living between the 70 years after the destruction of the first. So you would expect that everything that he says is talking about the rebuilding of the second. And in fact, this Gemara here says that Hezekiah is talking about the time of Ezra, meaning the second Bet HaMikdash. On the other hand, there are a lot of things that he describes that did not happen in the second Bet HaMikdash. So therefore, some say that he's talking about a third Bet HaMikdash sometime in the future. Tanyan Menaḥot, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Parasha zo Eliyahu atid ledorsha. Amar lo Rabbi Yosef, Miluim ikribu b'mei Ezra, keder shikribu b'Moshe. Amar lo tanuach da'atcha, shehenachta da'ati. There's a braita that teaches the same thing that we just said regarding this pasuk. Rabbi Yehuda says that this paragraph we'll know what it means when Eliyahu Navi comes. Otherwise, we don't know what this pot is doing there. However, Rabbi Yosef says this is Miluim. This is for the inauguration of the second Bet HaMikdash in the time of Ezra, just like was done in the time of Moshe. And then Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Yosef, "Thank you. You put my mind at ease. Let your mind be put at ease also, because you did that for me." It's a good answer. Next, V'chol nevela utrefa min ha'of u'min ha'behema lo yochelu ha'kohanim. Yechezkel further says that Kohanim may not eat at nevela, something that dies by itself, not from proper shechita, and that's for an animal and for a bird. The Kohanim cannot eat it. So we ask about this pasuk. Kohanim hu de lo yochelu ha'israd achli. Only Kohanim cannot eat nevela, but other Jews can eat. The Torah says nobody's allowed to eat nevela. So this is a curious pasuk. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Parasha zo Eliyahu atid ledorsha. Rabbi Yochanan says when Eliyahu comes, he'll tell us what this pasuk means. Right now, we cannot understand it. Ravina Amar Kohanim misterich le salkadatecha min ha'il ve'ishtere melika legabai utishtere nami nevela utrefa kamashmalan. Ravina says, no, I need this specifically to tell me that nevela is prohibited to Kohanim. Of course, it's prohibited to everybody. But I might think that Kohanim can eat nevela because they're allowed to eat a bird that you get milika. Milika is how you kill a bird in the Bet HaMikdash, from the back of the neck with a Kohen's thumb. And then that actually becomes kosher to eat for Kohanim. And therefore, the Kohanim eat most of the bird, like if it's a korban hatat. And so I might think that since in the Bet HaMikdash they're allowed to eat milika, so too maybe they're allowed to eat nebela and terefa. That's why the pasuk in Hezekiah says, no, don't think the Kohanim are no exception. This is the only exception. But outside the Mikdash, they have the same laws as everybody else. Another pasuk in Hezekiah says that you should do this on the 7th of the month for anyone that errs and makes an error, or that is simple, and you can make an atonement for the house. What is this pasuk talking about? Some korban that you have to bring on the 7th of the month? We never heard of such a thing. Shib'ah? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Elu shib'ah shebatim shechatu, v'af al pi she'en ruba shel kahal. So Rabbi Yochanan reinterprets this pasuk and says, this shib'ah is not talking about on the 7th of the month, but rather a korban that would be brought if 7 of the 12 tribes sinned by mistake because their leadership, their judges taught them the wrong thing. So this is a variation of Para Elim Davar Shel Sibur. If the Sanhedrin issues a false ruling, they say cheleb is permitted, and then the majority of the nation follows it, then the majority of the nation does not have to bring korban chatat, the judges have to bring korban chatat. Now the chidush here is that even if it's not the majority by population of all the 12 tribes, if there's the majority of the 12 tribes that sinned, even if it's not the majority of the entire nation. Maybe it's 7 tribes that are relatively small in number, but the majority of those tribes sinned. So you have a majority of tribes that sinned, even though they're relatively small tribes, and the bigger tribes did not sin. Still, one has to bring this type of korban. And chodesh doesn't mean month. Im chideshu ve'ameru. Read it, chidush. if they made a new law that was wrong, cheleb mutad, for example, if they say cheleb is permitted, and then it says meish shogeg mipetim melamed she'en chayvim ela al ha'ilim davar im shegat maaseh, and so for someone who acts b'shogeg, so this teaches that one has to, the judges will have to bring a korban, or the head of the nasi, the head of the tribes will have to bring this pad ha'ilim davar shel sibur, only if they issued a mistaken ruling and the people actually follow it. If they don't actually follow it, a majority of the people actually follow it, then they don't have to bring korban. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Zachur oto ish letob v'Chanina ben Hezekiah shemo sheil malehu nigna sefer Yechezkel shayu davrav sosrim divrei Torah me'asa he'ela shelosh me'od karbe shemen v'yashav ba'aliyah udrasho. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, we remember for good that man whose name was Chanina ben Hezekiah. If not for him, we would have to put away Sefer Yechezkel. We would have to tell people, you're not allowed to read it. We have to put it into hiding because the words in Yechezkel, some of the words, as we saw some examples above, contradict the Torah, and it's going to make everybody very confused. And so we might have had to take out Sefer Yechezkel from circulation. But what did he do? He took 300 jugs of oil so that he could stay up even at night. And he sat in an upper story and he explained each of these Pesukim. He using a derasha, like this one here. Don't read it Chodesh, read it Chidush, and so on. And once you got through with it, it took him a long time, but he was able to save the book by explaining all of these difficult Pesukim. Amar Rabbi Shimon, im hayu lehem parim merubin v'chule. The Mishnah taught in the name of Rabbi Shimon that if the Bet HaMikdash has a lot of parim, however, they don't have the various libations. So better to bring even one pod with all the appropriate libations rather than bring more parim but have missing out on the libations. Tenu Rabbanan, ve'efa la par ve'efa la ayel ya'aseh minchav lakebasim kasher tasig yado v'shem menhin la'efa. We're going to derive that law from another pasuk in Yechezkel. We actually read this pasuk, and it says that he shall prepare a meal offering. So you need, with the korban, you bring a meal offering. And how much will the meal offering be? Efa for the pod, efa for the ayel. He will make the meal offering for the kebasim as much as they can afford, and also a shem menhin for an efa. Rabbi Shimon, v'chim parim ve'elim echat hi is the amount of flour that you need for a flour offering. For a pod, the same as elim and ayil. It's not the same. For a pod, you need 3/10 of an efa, and for an ayil, need only 2/10 of an efa. So why does it say here efa la pod ve'efa la ayil, as if it's the same thing? Lashim hayu lahem parim merubin v'lo hayu nesachim yaviu par echad unsachav v'al yikerebu kulan v'lo nesachim. Rather, it comes to teach la par one. Even if you have even if you have many parim, but you don't have enough nesachim, you don't have enough of the flour and the wine, then it's better to bring one pod with its accompanying libations, and do not bring all of them without libations. That's why it says bring the full amount for even one pod is better. And similarly, if you have many elim, but you don't have sufficient funds to buy also the accompanying sacrifices, libations, better to bring one ayil. So that's why it says ve'fa la ayil, one ayil, rather than bring all of the animals without the accompanying flour. Next Mishnah, hapar v'ha'ilim v'kebasim v'sa'ir en me'akebin et halechem ve'lo halechem me'akevan. Back to Shavuot. That on Shavuot we have special korbanot that are just for Shavuot. Independent of the musafim that are mentioned in Sefer Bemidbar. In Sefer Vayikra, it talks about 1 bull, 2 rams, 7 lambs, and 1 goat. Those 7 lambs, or 7 kevasim, is in addition to 2 more kevasim that come along with the bread. So the Mishnah teaches that the pad, elim, kebasim, and sa'ir, they, if you don't have those, they do not prevent you from bringing the bread. You can bring the bread alone. And if you don't have the bread, you can still bring all of the other sacrifices. The Tanakh said it works both ways. And you could bring one without the other both ways. Rabbi Akiva says, no, one way but not the other. If you don't have bread, then you cannot bring the kebasim. It's referring to the 2 kebasim. There's 2 sets of kebasim. There's the 7 kebasim that go along with the 1, 2, 7, 1. And then there's the 2 kebasim that are specific for the lechem. And Rabbi Akiva says that the lechem, if you don't have bread, you cannot bring those 2 kebasim. However, though, if you don't have those 2 kebasim, you can still bring the 2 breads that you bring on Shavuot from wheat. According to Rabbi Akiva, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, Lo ki ela hakebasim ma'akebin et halechem ve'alechem eno ma'akeb et hakebasim. Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas is the opposite of Rabbi Akiva, that if you don't have the kebasim, you cannot bring the bread. But if you don't have the bread, you can still bring the kebasim on their own. How do you know? Shikan masinu keshayu Yisrael bamidbar 40 shana karebu kebasim belo lechem. Afkan yikerebu kebasim belo lechem. When Israel was in the desert for 40 years, they brought the kebasim, but they didn't have the bread. Because the bread that the 2 loaves that you bring on Shavuot have to be from wheat grown in the land of Israel, and they didn't have wheat from the land of Israel when they were in the desert. But nevertheless, they still brought the 2 kebasim. So too, in general, even when you're in the land, if you have the kebasim, you can offer them by themselves. Kebasim, if you don't have the kebasim, then you cannot bring the lechem. But if you don't have the lechem, you can still bring the kebasim. So yes, you can bring the kebasim alone, just like they did in the desert. You could do the same thing today. Amar Rabbi Shimon. This Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Stam, not the same as Rabbi Shimon ben Anas. And if this Rabbi Shimon comments, halacha kedibre ben Nanas, avalena tam kidvarav. The halacha follows ben Nanas. This follows Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. However, it's not for that reason. It's for a different reason. Shekol amur b'chumash pekudim kareh b'midbar, v'chol amur b'torat kohanim en kareh b'midbar. All of the sacrifices that are mentioned in Sefer B'midbar, in Parashat Pinchas, regarding all the musafim, those were offered in the desert. But all those that are listed in Sefer Vayikra, and specifically the 1, 2, 7, 1, 2, that are offered on Shavuot, are not brought in the desert. And when they came into the land, they brought everything. So your proof is not a proof, because it's true they didn't have the bread in the desert, but they didn't have any of those sacrifices that are mentioned in Vayikra. So that there's no proof that in the desert they brought the 2 kebasim, but without the bread. That's not a proof. They didn't bring the kebasim either. So therefore, why do I agree with the law that you could bring kebasim even without the bread? The reason is because the kebasim permit themselves. When you bring that kebas, this is talking about the 2 kebasim that are Shilamim offerings, unlike the 7 that are burnt offerings. So these 2 that should be brought with the bread, once you take it, you do slaughter it, and you sprinkle the blood, it permits the rest of that animal. So they have a permitter. That's themselves. They are their own permitter. But the lechem does not have a permitter. You can't eat the bread until you sprinkle the blood of the kevasim. So if you don't have kevasim, you cannot have bread. But if you don't have, there's no one to make it permitted. But if you don't have the bread, the kevasim can permit themselves. Tenor banan, vikrabtem ala lechem, chova ala lechem, shibat yamim, shibat kebasim temimim, afapi she'en lechem. The Gemara is going to expand on the Mishnah and bring this pasuk in 23:18. Vikrabtem ala lechem, shibat kebasim temimim. Okay, in the end of the Mishnah, we're talking about the 2 kebasim that are shelamim. Now we're shifting and going back to the 7 kebasim that are for Shavuot. They're mentioned in Vayikra. And said, you should bring upon the bread the 7 kevasim, b'nei shana, and so on. Also par, ben bakar, elim, shanaim, here's the 1, par, the 2, elim. Okay, so it says ala lechem. So does that mean that you need bread for those also? Well, let's see. Vikrabtem ala lechem, chob ala lechem. If I have just those words, have it with the bread, I would assume that yes, you need the bread. Shivat kebasim temimim afal pi she'en lechem. Then when the pasuk says you bring 7 unblemished kebasim, that means even without the bread. In other words, look at the order. If it said shivat kebasim temimim ala lechem, if it said the opposite order, then you say, oh, for sure it has to be with the bread. But it doesn't say that, or it says ala lechem first, and then it says shivat temimim, shivat kebasim temimim. And since it's an independent clause after the lechem, that means you can bring it even without the bread. So if you can bring the 7 kevasim even without the bread, why mention the words with the bread? מלמד שלא נתחייבו בכבשים קודם שנתחייבו בלחם דיבר רבי טרפון. Rabbi Tarfon says, this teaches that they were not required to bring the kevasim before they were required to bring the bread. When were they first required to bring the bread? When they entered into the land of Israel. So therefore you see that did not bring the kevasim when they were out in the desert. As Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said earlier. Rabbi Akiva omer, Yachol hen kevasim hamurim kan, hen kevasim hamurim b'chomash hapikudim. Rabbi Akiva is further explaining these pesukim. And you might think, could it be that the 7 kevasim that are mentioned here in Vayikra are the very same 7 kevasim that are mentioned in Sefer Bemidbar? Because remember, over there was 2171. Here it's 1271. But the 7 kevasim, they look the same. So except for the bull and the ram, which is 2 bulls and 1 ram in Bemidbar, 1 bull and 2 rams in Vayikra, but then it goes and they both say 7 lambs. So I might think that they're referring to the same 7 lambs on the best day in Eretz Yisrael when you have everything. You would bring 14 lambs. Why say that? Rabbi Akiva is saying sometimes there's repeated laws. And maybe Bemidbar is repeating what was already in Vayikra, but there's really only 7 lambs altogether. Amarta keshe'ata magia etzel parim ve'elim enan hen ela haladu ba'in biglal atzman ve'haladu ba'in biglal lechem. But you can't say that because when you come to the parim and the elim, they're not the same because in Bemidbar you have 2 bulls and 1 ram, and Vayikra you have 1 bull and 2 rams. So if those numbers matched up, then you'd say, they're both all the same numbers, 217, 217, they're the same. But since the bull and the rams are a different number, we should assume that the lambs are different lambs, and these come on their own. The ones in Bemidbar come just for the sake of the holiday, and they were brought also in the desert, but the ones in Vayikra come only if you have bread. And so we conclude from this, as we already said before, that all the animals that are mentioned in Sefer Bemidbar, those were brought in the desert when they had no bread. But the animals, the 1271 that are mentioned in Vayikra, that were not, those are separate, and they were not given in the desert because they didn't have the bread. V'dilma parim ve'elim lo inhu hakevasim inhu ninhu. Wait a second. Just because the parim and elim are not the same, because that's 2-1 and the other one's 1-2. But so what? Maybe the kevasim are the same. The bull and the ram are separate, and the 7 are the same. No, from the fact that the bulls and rams are different numbers, makes sense that the 7 lambs in Bemidbar are not the same as the 7 lambs mentioned in Vayikra. And why are you assuming that parim and elim are 2 different requirements? Maybe the Torah is giving you options. This is a very interesting reading. That when you maybe the Torah is saying as follows: if you want, you have to bring 1 and 2, but it could go either way. If you want to bring 1 pod and 2 elim, you can do that. That's the option 1 in Vayikra. If you want, you could bring 2 padim and 1 ayil. That's option 2. That's what it says in Bemidbar. Just bring 3 altogether. And if you read it that way, then the 7 lambs in Vayikra are the same as the 7 lambs in Bemidbar. And the answer to that is Mide ish teni sidran shemamina acharine ninhu. No, the order of them is different in each. In Vayikra, it says the bulls and then rams. First it says sheep and then bull. And Vayikra, and in Bemidbar, it says the bull and then the ram and then the sheep. So they're in different orders. If they were in the same order, you could say, okay, 1 and 2. If it always went bull and then ram, 1 and 2 and 1 and 1 and 2, fine. But one says bull first, another one says ram first, and that shows that these are in fact 2 different lists, and the 7 kevasim that are mentioned in Vayikra are independent from the 7 kevasim that are mentioned in Bemidbar. Halechem me'akev et hakevasim. The Mishnah mentioned that according to Rabbi Akiva, if you don't have the bread, then you cannot bring the kevasim. But the bread alone you can bring. My ta'amad Rabbi Akiba. What is Rabbi Akiba's source? Kamar yihiyu me tihiena. Ma lehalan lechem, afkan lechem. The answer is he's comparing the two places where it says to be, and then whenever it says to be, it means precisely so. And it says yihiyu in verse 20 and tihiena in verse 17. And just like that one is talking about bread, this one's also talking about bread. Let's see what we're talking about. So if we look in Pasuk 20, Heniva Kohen otam al lechem habikurim tenufa lefnei Adonai al shnei kebasim kodesh yihiyu l'Adonai lakohen. This pasuk mentions the two loaves, that's the lechem. It also mentions the shnei kebasim, the two that are going to be korban shelamim. And it says regarding them, the word yihiyu, kodesh yihiyu. These words are going to be very important in a minute. They are holy, la Hashem. They are for Hashem. They're also for the kohen. The kohen does eat the lechem entirely, and he also eats most of the korban shelamim of the kebasim. They're also holy, so they belong to Hashem. They belong to the kohen. In any case, says the word yihiyu in this pasuk, but it's not clear. Is the yihiyu saying you have to bring which one, the lechem or the kebasim? Which one has to be brought even without the other one? And so Rabbi Akiva says, well, look up here. It also says tihiena, and that's the same word, even though it's a different form. And this pasuk is talking about lechem tenufa, so tihiena. So just like over here it says that the word tihiena is referring to lechem, so to here the yihiyu is referring to the lechem. That is what's necessary, and you bring it even without the kevasim. But the kevasim you would not bring without the lechem. That's Rabbi Akiva. Uben Nanas, when he said the opposite, what's his source? Kamar yihiyu, yihiyu. Malalan kebasim, afkan kebasim. He also makes a gezer hashava and uses the same yihiyu in Pasuk 20, but he notes that in Pasuk 18 it also says the word yihiyu over here. And over here it's talking about shibat kebasim and so on. And so this is kebasim and it says yihiyu. And this is also talking about, it also has kebasim. So this proves that the word yihiyu here and in 18 proves that the word yihiyu in this pasuk is referring to the kebasim. They have to be brought, and they can be brought alone even without the lechem. Okay, so now we have to try to decide between these. Uben nanas nameh nelaf mitihiyena. How come Ben Nanas doesn't agree with the Rabbi Akiva and learn it from tihiyena? Malalan lechem afkan lechem, and say just like there it's bread, here it's bread, and you have to bring bread. You bring the bread alone. And he'll say no. Tani yihiyu me yihiyu v'endanin yihiyu mitihiyena. It makes more sense to use the exact same form of the verb, yihiyu and yihiyu, which he does in 18 and 20, and not yihiyu from tihiena, which is a different form of the verb. My nafka mina. Wait, what's the difference if it's a different form? Hatana deber b'Yishmael v'shaba kohen u'bah kohen zeu shiba v'zeu bia. We have a braita in the school of Yishmael. They made a gezerah shava between shav and ba. Those are completely different verbs, and this is regarding leprosy of a house. He has to come several times to check it, and this gezerah teaches that just like he waits after the first time to see. He gives a period of waiting to come back again. So the second time also he gives another period of waiting for another week. Anyway, we make a gezerah shava between two completely different verbs. So we should. What's wrong with making a gezerah shava of yihiyu and tihiena like Rabbi Akiva did? And Ben Nanas answers, "Hane mile hecha deleka dedamile, aval hecha deika dedamile medem damele yalfinan." Says no, you would. Yes, everybody agrees that you could make a gezerah shava between two different words when there's nothing else that's similar. But here you have a verb that's more similar. Therefore, you should pick the yihiyu and the other yihiyu because those are more similar. If there was no other yihiyu, then fine, I would learn from tihiena. But if you have a word that's exactly the same, you should prefer that for the gezerah shava. Rabbi Akiva, how come we don't agree with Ben Nanas and learn yihiyu and yihiyu? Danin davar shematana lakohen v'davar shematana lakohen lapukehane de'olot ninhu. We should learn something that is a gift to the kohen. That's the lechem is a gift to the kohen, and the other thing is the kebasim, which is also a gift to the kohen. That's the kebasim of the two kebasim that are shelamim. So those should go together. But these in 18 is referring to olot. In 18 is referring to korban olah. These 7 are korban olot. Now, it doesn't make any sense to compare Pasuk 20. Pasuk 20 is talking about 2 items that are lechem and the 2 kevasim shelamim. These are all things that go to the kohen, as the Pasuk continues, la kohen. And so therefore, this yihiu, we should connect it with the tihiena before, because that's talking about the lechem. You want to make a gezerah shava. Great, you have yihiu. It's the same verb, but the kebasim are different kebasim. These kebasim are shilamim. You want to compare it to kebasim that are olot and are not given to the kohen at all. And so that's how the Akiva counters. Another explanation for their machloket is without using gezerah shava. Bikra gufeh kami palgeh. They're arguing on how to interpret these 4 words in Pasuk 20 itself. Kodesh yihiu ladonai lakohen. Rabbi Akiva savar ezehu davar shekolo lakohen. When it says this will be yihiu, this will be holy to Hashem, to the Kohen. So what's something that goes all to the Kohen? That's the lechem. And so therefore, this pasuk mentions 2 things. It's true. But one is the kevasim, that part of it is sacrificed on the mizbeach, the parts of a shilamim, and part of it is eaten by the kohen. But we want something that will be la kohen, entirely that to the kohen. So the word yihiu in this phrase, since it says yihiu la kohen, it must be referring to the lechem, and the lechem has to be brought even without the kevasim. Or benanas miketiv kodesh yu la kohen. Benanas will counter. If the pasuk said only 3 words, kodesh yu la kohen, then I would agree with you. The lechem goes only to the kohen, but it doesn't say that. Kodesh yu la Hashem la kohen kitib. Ezu davar shemiksato la Hashem miksato la kohen. Haveh omer elu kevasim. Since it says to Hashem and to the kohen, so therefore you should interpret the word yihiu is telling me that something that part of it goes to Hashem and part of it that goes to the kohen. That's what yihiu. You have to bring it no matter what, and that's the kevasim. That part of it is burnt and part of the kohanim eat, and therefore you have to bring the kevasim even without the bread. Rabbi Akiva, miketib kodesh yu la Hashem vela kohen, la Hashem la kohen ketib. Ked Rav Huna, damar Rav Huna, kenao Hashem untano la kohen. Rabbi Akiva will counter and say, it doesn't say that it will be holy to Hashem and to the kohen. There's no vav there. Rather, it says La Hashem La Kohen. So how do you interpret that La Hashem La Kohen? We interpret it as Rav Huna explains that when you bring a sacrifice like this, it all goes to Hashem, and Hashem tells the Kohanim, you can eat it. So that's the lechem, where the Kohanim eat all of it. It is Kodesh La Hashem. Yes, that's true. It's holy to Hashem, and Hashem tells the Kohanim, you can eat the whole thing. But it should be referring to something that the Kohanim get the entirety of it. So therefore, you refers to the lechem, and that's why you must bring the lechem, and you bring the lechem even if you cannot bring the kebasim. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.